coming. We're a little bit behind, so I wanted to try to get started to stay back on track. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are the psychedelic session from Indigenous knowledge to applications in medicine. And we're going to kick this off with a talk from Noelle Joy, who is going to be talking about the effect of outdoor and controlled environment drying on quality of hemp flower grown for cannabidiol. So thank you, Noelle.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. It's really an honor to be here. I've been excited about a lot of conferences, but I find that the people that I've met here have been very grounded and really excited about plants and their relationship to plants. And that's been a really beautiful thing to experience. And I'm really grateful to be here. I am studying hemp at the University of Georgia. I'm in the last year of a PhD program, and I'm 12 minutes is not that long to share years and years of research. And there's lots of things I wanted to share, but I thought I'd just kind of go through some of the things that felt exciting and fun and give you a little bit of an overview and one slide with lots of data that you can maybe take a picture of and get excited about. So so what I did is I'm looking a lot at post-harvest. So when you're working with plant material, there's the growing side of it, and then it's trying to preserve it so that you have a high quality material that then is going to be used medicinally and have therapeutic effects on the body. And for me, I'm really interested in post-harvest. I actually have, for 5 years, I managed a medicinal herb farm and grew 40 to 50 different kinds of plants and dried them and put them into a line of herbal products. And I've dried 15 to 20,000 pounds of herbal plant material, and nothing prepared me for trying to do post-harvest study on cannabis. Cannabis is, I like to say, she's like a diva, and she requires unique and special treatment at every step of the way through growing and drying and storage and all of that. So it's been a true honor to work with this plant and be changed by this plant. So in my research, there's kind of two different products that I'm researching, or two different ways the flower that we grew can be preserved. And one of them is the biomass, and the other is kind of smokable flower. And they're harvested and processed a little differently. So for biomass, what we're looking at is the leaf and flower. And it's so interesting to look back and then also look at the screen here. So the leaf and flower, the goal is to get CBD as high as possible, because usually that's what they're extracting the material for. Usually there's a chemical or mechanical extraction. The look, like the the taste, the terpenes, whether it's brown or not, doesn't really matter as much because they're doing a solvent extraction. And then usually extracts are used to put into therapeutic products. And at least where I'm here in Georgia, and how it often is that plants are grown outside, whole plants are grown outside, and then they're grown or they're dried maybe in like a barn. Often it's not in a controlled environment. And like whole plants are just harvested and dried upside down, and then kind of the leaf and flowers taken off of the stem, or it's dried in an oven. And I actually talked to someone that said it might be easier to extract the CBD if it's already been decarboxylated by drying it in the oven. So that's kind of one market for the biomass. And so in my research, I wanted to kind of look at those drying methods and see how that impacted the quality of the flower. So I looked at oven drying at 2 different temperatures, at 40 C and 50 C. And then I looked at hanging it upside down to dry in an open air barn. And I just looked at material before and after drying and was like, okay, what happens? Oh, and the things I'm looking at are cannabinoids, terpenes, moisture content, water activity, and color. Those are some of the quality characteristics that I'm evaluating in my research. And then the other piece, which is very fascinating to me, and it's really cool because I'm like, okay, well, I'm studying this in hemp, but it really applies to THC, like to cannabis, like all different ways that cannabis flower is grown. And so it's really exciting to think about how my research might influence kind of the broader industry at some point. I mean, a girl can hope, but so smokable flower, you probably already all know this. We're looking at the trimmed flower bud. The goal is the look and the taste. Terpenes are incredibly important, so we want to do what we can to preserve them. And it's more carefully dried in a controlled environment, usually in smaller quantities. This is often where people will do an indoor grow of kind of smokable quality flower. It's often hand trimmed to remove the leaves, and then it undergoes a curing process. And in this case, it's typically used for smoking or putting into a tea. So here's the kind of conditions for controlled environment drying. If you've never dried cannabis flower before, which actually in this group of people, I'm assuming that a lot of you have dried cannabis before on your own. But yeah, this is kind of what I realized or was told was industry standard, especially the curing process. There's a lot of art and science that goes into the curing process, and we're not exactly sure what's happening. But the curing process does create a smoother smoke. And so I looked at before, during, and after drying and curing, like different stages all through the process, because I'm curious, do the terpenes and the cannabinoids change during the drying and curing process, or are there other things that are changing that creates or changes the chemistry of the plant to create a smoother smoke? So here's some pictures of my drying setup. I used in the middle, I used just a walk-in cooler that we put a air conditioning unit in and then a dehumidifier. And the field hemp is on the right. And then on the left, that's all the trimming. I was like, wow, for my PhD research, I got to trim like 10 pounds of hemp flower. It was pretty cool. There were some student volunteers that came in and they were like, what is going on? And then those are the buckets for curing. And I had sensors inside the buckets and outside the buckets, looking at temperature and humidity, seeing if any of those are factors. And just summary notes on drying. You're welcome to look at this. So of course you're going to look at it as a slide on the screen. Summary notes on drying. The three things that influence drying are temperature, airflow, and humidity. Most herbs are dried with high heat and low humidity. Like I said, not cannabis, she's a diva, requires special attention. We love her for it. You can adjust each of those variables, temperature, airflow, and humidity, based on the desired end product and what you have available to you to influence the rate of drying. But humidity is a really important one. And when the humidity is not controlled, especially in a really humid climate, then it can be really a challenge with mold. So we just want to pay attention to that. So here's like the most exciting part of my research. I did scanning electron microscopy, looking at the that was another thing I looked at, is the trichomes. And I got to go to the lab and actually prepare the samples to be analyzed. And something that's really cool, we do like a chemical dehydration process, and then we mount them on plates, and then on the bottom right, there's actually this machine that turns gold into plasma, and then it coats the plant material with a thin layer of gold. And then you put it into the microscope, and then it shoots electrons at that. And because it's covered in a metal, it'll reflect electrons back. And then the image that you get based on that is the scanning electron micrograph image. And I was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever done in my life. So here's what they look like. There's two different varieties of hemp that I looked at in my research. One on the top left is the variety Vaughn, and the other one is Sunset. And you can see that they have these stalked capitate glandular trichomes, and they're very similar in the two different varieties that I looked at. But in the Vaughn, they're more dense. And in the Sunset, they're a little bit more spread out. And it's really interesting though, because the terpene content total was higher in the Sunset variety, which I thought was interesting. Here's another picture of some of the plant parts. I think it's so beautiful. I want to like print them out and have them as artwork in my home. And if anybody wants any access to these images, I'll put my email in the presentation at the end, and you're welcome to email me, and I'm happy to send you pictures. And then the rest of this talk, I just want to talk about the terpenes because I'm very, very excited about them. So one of the things I really wanted to look at in the drying of this plant material was how much the terpenes are lost in the drying process, because in a lot of studies, they do a solvent extraction of the terpenes, but you don't actually see the total amount and how that changes as a result of drying method. So I did distillation of all my samples. And so that looked like putting plant material in a flask. I put it in a heating mantle, and then it's hooked up to a piece of glassware on the right called a Clevenger trap. And the steam will go up with the essential oils. They'll hit a condenser. It'll fall back down into a collecting arm. And then that opaque substance at the top, that's the essential oil or the terpenes. And here's the result of that. Based on the 2 varieties I looked at, you can see very clearly that oven drying of the hemp plant material leads to a loss in terpenes. And not surprisingly, the highest amount was the trimmed plant material that was dried in a controlled environment. Here's another thing that I thought was really interesting is during the drying and curing process for the controlled environment, and this has all been normalized to moisture content, and you start, and then actually when it goes to like 20 to 15% moisture, you actually get an increase in terpenes. And we're not exactly sure, but I'm interested in, when I review the data, to see, I was reading another paper and they were saying that one of the reasons why you want to do a low and slow drying of cannabis is that there's actually a lot of enzymatic activity happening right after harvest, and that you might get like a spike in production of terpenes and cannabinoids. And again, I'm not exactly sure yet. When I analyze the data, I'm going to look at that and see if my data supports that hypothesis. But this is a really interesting thing, that there's kind of a spike or an increase in the terpenes right after harvest through the first bit of drying. And I wish I actually had like a lot of intention to share results from doing GCMS analysis on the composition of the terpenes. I'm actually like teaching myself how to use the GCMS. I'm in the horticulture, and there's not anyone else that can use that machine. So if any of you know how to use GCMS, maybe come talk to me afterwards, figuring it out. But if you just wanted to take a picture of this slide and look at it later, this is some very, very, very preliminary analysis of how the composition of the essential oil changes as a result of drying method. And we have fresh, dried, and then stored for 6 months. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much for the chance to share with you.
Thank you. I think we have time for a question or two.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I just, I guess I had some questions more about how you grew with, was there any like pesticides, or how that affect composition? And also, did you look at any possible contaminants like mold or bacteria and how that impacted it?
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to look at mold and bacteria, so I was really interested in Chica's talk because I was like, oh, I wish I was able to look at that. Unfortunately, no, but I did have, and we did not spray any pesticides. I think my professor did spray one fungicide throughout the season because it was like, he wanted to make sure I had research material. But we didn't do like a toxicology analysis on that. But actually we did grow 2 varieties. And the first variety, I was halfway through my study, and we had 5 days of rain in a row. And then when I went to like complete my study, everything had molded in the field and I had to start over. But thankfully I had a second later maturing variety that didn't succumb. So we did have some fungus issues, but thankfully we had kind of prepared for that. But yeah, unfortunately I wasn't able to look at the microbiology of it.
Oh, I just wanted to ask about the slide where you showed that the yield of essential oil had actually increased in a controlled drying environment. How did you compensate for the differences in the mass of the leaves in order to make that calculation? So, for example, normally you would sort of say, okay, wet leaf weight, this percentage, but when it's dry, you end up with a higher amount of leaves. for that same mass?
So I think, so I had trimmed everything. So I trimmed it fresh and then it was trimmed dry. So there wasn't leaf material on it. Is that,
Oh, sorry, no, I mean, did you sort of pre-weigh everything whilst it was still wet so that it was all normalized across the board?
well, so I did do a moisture analysis on every sample. So I homogenized the plant material
Yeah.
and then I took a little bit of that and did a moisture analysis on every sample that I ran. And then I normalized to that moisture content.
Oh, perfect answer.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, maybe one quick question and then we got to move on to the next one.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Interesting, but I'm interested to know in terms of the cannabinoid content, and did you look at isomeric forms of cannabinoids during post-harvest?
Do you mean we
Like
did?
CBN?
Oh, yeah. So we actually analyzed 14 cannabinoids. 7 of them were the acid form and then the decarboxylated form. So we did CBG, CBN, CBD, THC, CBC, THCA. There was several. So we looked at 14 cannabinoids, and I haven't fully analyzed all of that data yet. From preliminary, just looking at it, it looks like the cannabinoid profile didn't actually change much, except for there was a bit higher amount of the decarboxylated forms of cannabinoids in the oven drying. But total, once we did all the conversions, the total amount of cannabinoids didn't really change as a result of drying method.